Hello and welcome to Conversations with Catholics. Today, I'm joined by Andy from Persuaded Apologetics. What's up, Andy? What's up, Andy?
How's it going, man? I'm
Oh,
having a good day.
good. Things are going good.
Can you hear me?
I sure can. I sure can. The audience is going to see
I think we've
a.
got a massive difference.
Oh, okay. I think that you're right. It must be just because we hit go live. That's kind of weird. Um,
Yeah.
Okay, bear with me. Uh, so here's what I'll do. I'll say a few words and then I'll kind of hand the mic over to you. But the audience is going to see the title of this video, and the title is going to say something to the effect of like Catholic antisemitism. And the only reason it's going to say that is because I made a video responding to a different Catholic content creator. Jesus said whatnot, and then you made a video responding to me. So instead of us falling into the infinite trap of back and forth, we figured, hey, let's just get on the phone and talk it out. But I think before we get there, there
Yeah.
are probably some more basic questions to ask beyond just, hey, how you doing today? But hey, Andy, how are you doing today? And tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Clearly, you are Catholic because you have a Catholic content. You have a Catholic YouTube channel, but you weren't always. I know this because I've seen your content, but not everyone from my audience will have. So, with that, Andy, take it away.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, my name's Andy. I'm having a wonderful day. I was telling Kevin that today was busy and stressful, but the best days are always busy and stressful. Lazy days never end up feeling like the best days. Yeah, I'm a Catholic content creator. I was not always Catholic. I used to be an independent, fundamental Baptist Christian. God bless. Um, I actually used to be in full time ministry as an IFB minister. I was kind of like an assistant pastor. There's a whole long story regarding that. I went to theology school for like 6 years, and the Baptist faith theology school is more like method school, and it's not. Let's just say it's not the greatest training that you could get. Catholics definitely have a one up on Baptists, and so yeah, I converted officially. I came into the church on November 1st of 2024 on All Saints Day. I made the hard decision to become Catholic probably about 6 months before that. And ever since then, I've been pursuing Catholic apologetics.
That's awesome. Um, I guess something that I watched one of your videos um, recently where you were talking about the way that you came into the church. You mentioned it very briefly here, but it sounds like it wasn't the easiest process in the world to leave the religion that you grew up in, the religion that you were, pursuing employment in, the religion that your parents cherished. Uh, I certainly have stories that I can tell about, I guess all those things. It was never an occupation for me, but my parents cherished the religion greatly. And my leaving their religion caused problems. And I understand that it's the same for you. I'm not sure if you want to add anything here, kind of tell the audience just a little bit about, how easy or not easy it was to leave the religion that you grew up in.
Yeah, so very, very difficult. Probably the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I wouldn't even necessarily say my personal detachment or loss of loyalty for the Baptist faith. I wouldn't say that was the hardest thing to lose. I would say that was more of one of the easier things to lose. But I would say the process and the relationships as I transitioned from being Baptist to Catholic, they were extremely difficult. Um, so if you are a Baptist, you're typically a fundamentalist. Obviously, if you're IFB, you're always a fundamentalist. It's in the name, independent fundamental Baptist. And basically, what they do and what fundamentalism is, I think, can be best described as investing your faith completely and wholly in things that you should not be investing your faith in. And then Once any one of those things has any doubt or is proven wrong in your eyes, you've kind of in a way fallen from the faith. I remember growing up and being told things like, hey, if you grow up and you go to a secular college, they're going to teach you evolution. And if you learn evolution, you agree with evolution, you'll become an atheist. Or they're going to teach you that Noah's Ark and this global flood didn't really happen and it's just a story in the Bible. And, you know, if you lose that, you'll lose your faith as a Christian and you'll become an atheist. And one by one, I saw different friends grow up. And what did they do? They went to college and the prophecy came true because in their mind, they were predetermined that they had to invest their faith in like a 6-day creation account or a global flood or a literal flood of any kind. And if that wasn't true, Christianity wasn't true. They've been like told that over and over again. So that literally manifested in their life. And so in the community I was raised in, I was raised to believe in a lot of uh, misconceptions about Catholicism. And I was constantly told over and over again that Catholicism or the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, that Catholics are not Christians. In fact, Catholics are pagans. And so, with that reinforced my whole childhood, my dad and my mom, their whole formation as a Baptist, especially in the 80s and the 90s, that was reinforced to them. So finally, when I converted, I'm their firstborn son. Obviously, you can understand, like, I'm the black sheep of the family now. Because not only their son hasn't just converted to a different denomination in the faith, he doesn't just believe a little bit different from, you know, what he used to believe. Now my son's going to hell. Now my son is a pagan, you know. Now my son is in this like universalist religion that the Bible calls the whore of Babylon. And so the relationships, especially the relationships with my father and my mother, have been extremely rocky.
You know, it's I could have said virtually all of that myself. I grew up a young Earth creationist because I grew up trad Catholic. We actually we used the Abeka brand of textbooks at our
Oh,
little.
me too.
Oh, look at that! And so, but you know what's funny is that we would take a Sharpie and we would cross out anytime that the Abeka books would mention the Protestant Reformation, and we would write in revolt because it wasn't a reformation of anything; it was a revolution, it was a revolt. But but we used those books, even though they were evangelical Protestant books or whatever. Why? Why didn't we use Catholic books? Because all the Catholic books were modernist and liberal. And we, you know, the real Catholics, we knew that we were not allowed to believe in evolution and things like that. Not only do we have that in common, but my dad, you know, obviously, right, with the way that I grew up, he took his faith very, very, very seriously. And so I'm only one of 4 siblings, but I grew up a mile down the road from my cousins, and there are 7 of them. So we were kind of like one big group, the 11 of us, 7 plus 4. And I'm right in the middle of the 11 of us. I'm the second oldest in my family, but I'm like the 5th or 6th oldest or something in the list of 11. I'm right in the middle. And I'm the only one to this day who publicly has left. Now, I do know that I have relatives who are like just not, they don't really believe it, but they go through the motions and all that. But I'm still the only one. So you can imagine, you know, at the time especially, when I told my dad that I didn't believe the same things as him anymore. So I actually wrote something down from your video. So you have a video called My Catholic Conversion Story. And in that video, you wrote about how your dad said something to the effect of, it would have been easier if you came out as gay to him than come out as Catholic. My dad told me that it would have been easier. It would have, I think he said better. It would have been better if you told me that you were addicted to heroin, because at least a heroin addict like knows that he's an addict, and you don't even think that you're wrong. Like the heroin addict knows that he's wrong, but you don't. You think that you're right, and so that makes it worse. That you're an agnostic. That's worse than being a heroin addict. And you can imagine that that wasn't the only thing that he said to me, right? Like there was a lot of emotional conversation. You mentioned something like your dad never cried really, but he cried about this. My dad was the same way. It was so um it was awful seeing him cry because he's, this macho trad Catholic kind of guy. Like he never cried until he cried because he thought that he failed me as a father. And that is the worst thing that I think I've ever felt, ever. Um and then there's this whole story about how they kind of forced me into a marriage and all that. So I wound up moving 700 miles away, and not really talking to them for like a year. I have a better relationship with them today. This was all 7 years ago at this point. This was 2018. It is now 2025. Um, but to this day, my relationship is just, it's not the same. It's better than it was. So I hope at least that can maybe bring a little bit of solace. But it's not the same. And if, I'm also older than I'm 29 today and I was 22 then. But it's the amount of like shame that I felt for bringing my parents so low emotionally, even though I didn't think that I was doing anything wrong. Like I understand why some people stay in their parents' religion just to not upset their family. Like I get it, man. It was awful. It was awful. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't
it sounds like you are part of like a fundamentalist Catholic,
oh, 100%.
and it's doing the exact same thing that fundamentalist Baptists do, and they try to invest their trust in something that they have no business investing all of their trust in. And I don't know the extent of the fundamentalism that was. I don't know if you were like full on. I deny that Pope Francis is the real Pope, or and that Vatican II is a real council. I don't know how far it went. Some people just are really strict about tradition and maybe the aesthetics of tradition, and they're just kind of a jerk to people who go to maybe more formal Catholic churches. But yeah, I don't know where you were, but I can see the potential for Catholic fundamentalism being so much more damaging to an individual than Baptist fundamentalism, because I think fundamentalism in a certain unintended way feeds on how large the faith is. The more faith there is, like the more that is a part of your religion, the more opportunity fundamentalism has to grab onto accidentals and of the faith and pretend like they're essential, and if they're not true, the faith isn't true.
Yeah, yeah. So we were fundamentalists, by the dictionary definition of the term. My family never straight up denied that, Pope Benedict was the Pope, because that, like, I left in 20. Hold on. So if I left in 2018, no, Francis was Pope. Francis became Pope when I was in college, probably. Probably. Anyway, my family never did. However, there were families who attended my church who did deny that. There were families at my church who, like, if they couldn't come to my chapel, they would actually go to an Orthodox church rather than go to the Novus Ordo, because a lot of us thought that the Novus Ordo was invalid. We had a lot. So we were an FSSP chapel, but we had a lot of families who would go to us and to the SSPX. So we were kind of like somewhere in between the FSSP and the SSPX in terms of our like severity. And if we were Kennedy Hall, like we were Tim Gordon, we were Taylor Marshall. So Taylor Marshall actually attends the FSSP. Yeah, Taylor Marshall I think is like the perfect way to, like, my family is Taylor Marshall. My chapel was Taylor Marshall. So they don't formally deny. Like Taylor Marshall will publicly, he's like, I'm not a Sede Vacantist, but then he'll say things. You're like, well, are you a Sede? That's kind of how that's how it was for me growing up. So it was fundamentalist, for sure. And leaving fundamentalist religion is probably, no, not probably. It was the hardest thing that I think I ever did. I lost everybody. I moved 700 miles away and I started a new life. And I'm really happy now, but it was a really long road to get here. That was 7 years ago. Like I said, the second half, the end of 2018 and all of 2019 and all of 2020, those were awful years for me. I was in a really bad place. Um, and I'm in a much better place today. So it does get better to anybody who's listening. But it's so hard to leave fundamentalist religion. Um, and so like whenever I hear, some people like to think of me as somebody who like celebrates and gloats whenever he hears about somebody apostatizing from the Catholic faith. I don't. My typical reaction is the way that I like to think about it is if somebody tells me that they're no longer Catholic, and if somebody says I'm getting a divorce, my response is typically about the same, because they're crappy situations no matter how you look at it, even if they are like for the better. Like somebody leaving an abusive spouse is for the best, because don't stay in an abusive situation. But it's still a really crappy situation either way, and I feel the same way about leaving religion. Like even if it's for the better, it's still really awful. So I try never to gloat. I don't think I do, but maybe I'm imperfect like everyone else. So yeah, whenever I hear about somebody leaving, I'm not like, oh woohoo party. I'm like, oh geez, it's you're in for a hard time, and I hope that you're okay. That's kind of my response.
Well, you don't seem like somebody who gloats a lot over people leaving the faith. You seem like somebody, even if I disagree with you, who has tried his best to come to truth and maybe not fallen in the same place as me. Personally, I think that if Catholicism is practiced correctly, if you're a faithful Catholic and you find that correct balance, I might get some flack for saying this, but I think Catholicism can be very healthy for a person, whether it's true or not. It gives young men something to latch onto. It gives you a culture. It gives you ritual. It gives you a lot of things I think people really do need in their life. Whether Catholicism is true or not, I'm of the opinion, obviously, that Catholicism is true. I think it's defensible. But whether it was or wasn't, I can't say if it wasn't true, I would be Catholic, because if I knew it weren't true, I would have a harder time. But if it's not true, I'm glad I'm duped, because it's really healthy for me and my family, which of course you had a different experience, because you were part of a family, it sounds like, and you would agree with this, that didn't have the correct balance, that it became toxic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were so unbalanced that we went to the traditional Latin mass 6 days a week growing up, like Monday through Friday and Sunday. Um, we went to confession once a week. We said the rosary as a family in Latin every day. Like we were like we were like the real deal. So balance is not a word that belongs in the same sentence as my upbringing. My whole life was the traditionalist movement. Um, and the traditionalist movement, especially back then, like 20 years ago and stuff like that, the traditionalist movement was not what it is. I understand that it's changed since I left. But like back then, it was very reactionary. We were very much so kind of defining ourselves based on who we were not. We were not the Novus Ordo. Those liberals, we are, the real Catholics. All those sermons about the fewness
They're
of
like
the saved.
Orthodox.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were like Catholic
They're not
Orthodox.
true unless Catholicism is false.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's the funny thing too, is like looking back on it, it's kind of like, wait, you guys really want to like argue against the papacy, but still call yourself Catholic? Like, I don't know if they do it though, they do it.
Yeah.
But
What
yeah.
I find weird about the Orthodox people is, and I don't know if there's any Orthodox people listening, they tend to only listen to themselves.
Yeah.
Is that the weird thing is they try and show that the papacy didn't exist as like a supreme authority in the early church when it clearly did. If the Orthodox people were being prudent about their polemics, they would say it existed, but it was heretical. It wasn't true. Because of popes like Pope Victor the First excommunicating churches halfway or all the way across the known world, it's silly to me to listen to them say, well, the Pope, there wasn't even really a Pope until like the 6th century, and it's like, weren't you united to the Catholic Church from the 6th century until like the 11th? Like, what are we saying here? And, it seems like their case against Catholicism isn't really the right case they should be making. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, part of me almost wonders if this whole like there wasn't a pope thing is kind of just like a definition game. Because I'll find that virtually all Catholic scholars will, admit, and admit's not even the right word, but they will agree that the office of the papacy evolved over time. Um, like the office of the
Yeah.
papacy in the second century didn't have nearly as much power as it did in the 12th century, and in the 12th century didn't have nearly as much power as it did in the 19th century. Like this is undeniable. Um,
Yeah.
and then so the Orthodox kind of look at that progression of kind of papal authority, and then they'll be like, "Bing, that's where the papacy actually began, because that's when it's close enough to resembling what we have today." And I'm kind of like, well,
It's like the beard fallacy.
that's 100% what it is. Yeah. It's just the Orthodox are looking at stubble and saying that's not a beard, and Catholics are saying, well, technically that's still a beard, or maybe that's a bad analogy, but you know what I'm trying to say. And we could go off on a tangent here about the beard thing, because I am actually one of those people who says that, like, well, if you want to get technical, I don't think that beards per se exist. And it's specifically because of the fallacy of the beard. So this it's a philosophical position called mereological nihilism. But pretty much all you're saying is that you think that mereology is a bunch of nonsense. And what is mereology? It's just the study of how things fit together. So pretty much what I'm saying is, do you think that this combination of this lid to a candle and this screwdriver, is this a thing in and of itself? Most people would say no, but most people would say, but this screwdriver is a thing unto itself. It is a real screwdriver. But look, I could go like this. Oh, I could take, I could take the actual steel piece out of the screwdriver. So like, is this really a screwdriver, or is this a handle?
It's like transubstantiation. You're changing the substance of something.
I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah. There's definitely an analogy there. So I'm one of those people who says, guys, like, this is all just humans trying to impose our categories on nature. Nature doesn't actually care about the words that we use to define things. And guess what? In nature, screwdrivers don't exist per se. Now, what do exist are the mereological simples arranged screwdriver wise. And so what we mean by that is there are collections of, atoms and molecules that are arranged in such a way that we humans will label a screwdriver. But that doesn't mean that, like, ontologically speaking, the screwdriver exists. And I feel the same way about beards. Beards, I don't think have like a real ontology. It's just we humans have come up with labels for patterns that we recognize, for the ways that the simples are arranged. Anyway, it's like a whole thing. But technically, I actually, like, when it comes to the fallacy of the beard, I think that we can say that beards don't exist because we, so that's a whole aside. I don't know if you don't want to go there, that's totally cool.
I've never heard of mereological nihilism. This is a first for me. But I'm intrigued.
And I actually think that it's more so a lot of people kind of think like, Kevin, you're crazy, and then they don't really give it a whole lot more thought. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am crazy. But I do think that it does kind of underlie a lot of my problems, I think, with and problems here, but like with Catholicism, because you rightly brought up transubstantiation. So I don't think that substances exist, right? Because, like, if I don't think that a screwdriver exists, then there is no substance of a screwdriver. So to speak in Aristotle's language, I think that accidents exist, but, like, I don't think that substances exist. I think that a thing is just what its accidents are, or at least that's how we label them. And so I think that transubstantiation cannot be possible because I don't think that substances exist. So that's like a pretty big barrier to me being Catholic, I guess. So, like, the mereological nihilism piece does kind of matter if you like want to think about it in like a super weird existential way. But that's like the weird philosophy stuff that only me and a very, very few other people actually find interesting. Most people are like, Kevin, you're crazy. Yeah. And they move on.
I wonder if you could find like because I don't know where you are, if you're an atheist or if you're an agnostic or a deist or whatnot, but I wonder if you can find more of a belief in substances in like understanding teleology, I don't know how to say the word,
Teleology,
of the
yeah.
universe. That sometimes different things exist because they exist for different purposes. And that would maybe be a good. I'm not rigorous enough in philosophy to be able to like uh, defend enough against those claims, but I'm just thinking like I would make us distinguish. I would distinguish between two things because the two things have different purposes. Because outside of that, they are a collection of atoms that I can't see. That just make up substance and more of the low sense of substance, right? Samples of material. Other than things having a purpose, that's where my mind goes.
Yeah, and it's quite possible that you'll see this coming and you'll kind of sigh and be like, "Oh, here's Kevin being crazy again." But I also don't think that teleology is veridical. That is to say, like, I don't think that purposes have like a real ontology to them, or teloi don't have a real ontology to them. What I mean by that is, I think that humans, we do things for purposes, but those purposes aren't intrinsic to nature. And so what I mean by that is something like, we might use this screwdriver to screw in something, but just because we do so doesn't mean that there is a substance of screwdriver which has the telos of to tighten nails or to tighten screws or something. And then now, of course, somebody like Aquinas would probably agree with me about the screwdriver. Why? Because the screwdriver is an artifact. It's not a natural object in the way that a human person is a natural object, or a rock, or a plant, or any of those things.
Yeah.
This is a man-made object, so it only has the telos of whatever we give it. Same thing with like a chair or a table. Yeah. But
in a way where it's God, right?
In a way where, yeah. That's a good way of thinking about it. But then Aquinas and I would disagree on things like, so I guess a big thing is like the reproductive organs. The whole reason why the Catholic Church's stance on their ethics of reproduction is what they are, and I'm trying to keep it PG, is because of teleology, right? And this was actually a big sticking point for me when I was leaving the Catholic faith, kind of. I had a very close friend who came out to me, and I was like, oh, geez, I know that this is wrong, but like I don't know why, really. So I better look into this. And so then I went on like this deep dive of like why does the Catholic Church teach what it teaches about reproduction and related topics. And so that's when I got really into teleology. And that's when I figured out like, I don't think I actually believe in teleology. That is to say, I think that Aristotle's physics was just not as accurate a model of the way that the world works as Newton's model was. And then Einstein's model was better than Newton's, and one day we'll move past Einstein's. That's all. So I'm not here to bash Aristotle or anything. But yeah, that was a lot. Let me pause to give you a moment to get a word in edgewise, and then if you don't have too much to say, I am happy to move on from here. I understand that this is a weird niche topic that nobody really cares about.
If you want to, you can move on. I want to be careful because I'm rigorous enough in philosophy to be able to discuss Aristotle with somebody, but I'm not rigorous enough and familiar with the topic to defend it thoroughly. And so, like somebody can say, I believe in the Trinity. The Trinity is 3 persons, 1 God. And that's technically accurate. But beyond that, you're risking like reviving some 4th century heresy.
Yes.
Like that's where I am when it comes to philosophy. Like I'm really risking accidentally being something I don't want to be.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I think that there was a saint who said this, but I always heard it in like sermons from my FSSP priests. But they would say something like, if your sermon on the Trinity is longer than 5 minutes, you are guaranteed to revive some ancient heresy. Like,
you've said something you shouldn't have said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, no need to dwell on obscure philosophy that only Kevin finds interesting. I'm wondering if you don't want to talk a little bit about what I titled the subject of this video.
Yeah, sure.
And just to remind the audience, I made a video responding to a different Catholic content creator called Jesus and Whatnot. Jesus and Whatnot said something to the effect of like, hey, it's kind of weird that Martin Luther is like a Protestant hero because he was really anti-Semitic. And my video was kind of like a, hey, like, sure, you're not wrong, but also, you might want to look at the log in your eye, before you're trying to look at the. So that was kind of what my. Oh, and then I pulled examples, two main examples, one from the Fourth Lateran Council, and then one from the writings of Saint John Chrysostom. So that was that's my very brief kind of purview of. Oh well, and then you made a response video to me. So actually,
Yes.
let me. So you go ahead. You explain what your video was, your response video to me, and then take it from there.
Yeah. So my response video wasn't necessarily fully a rebuttal to Kevin. I think there maybe was some unfamiliarity with Kevin because I wasn't sure exactly what his motivations were in making the video or what he personally thought. Like I find a lot of the content that you make, you're doing your best to be and make. Sometimes I'm not smart enough to know if you're succeeding in this because you seem to study certain niche topics that maybe I haven't gotten into yet. I don't know if you're being matter of fact. You might be matter of zero fact.
Matter
you never
of fiction.
know, but
Yeah.
you try your best to be matter of fact. Yeah, so matter of fiction. So I'm not sure if you're correct or not, but you seem to be trying to be matter of fact, and I don't know your motives all the time. So maybe there was a few moments where I suggested, hey, I'm not sure if he's trying to paint it in a certain way. Like I brought up, I'm not sure if Kevin is trying to paint this canon. I think it was 67 of Fourth Lateran Council as kind of like the Christian version of a jizya. And I could have been completely wrong in that, but you weren't technically wrong. Like those canons do exist, and certain Catholics have kind of behaved in very anti-Semitic ways. I think it's important because my goal in a lot of my ministry is not just to win the Protestant over, and especially the evangelical, because I was evangelical, so I understand them in a unique way, and especially the fundamentalist evangelical, but also to help Catholics stay in the faith. It's important that when Catholics see something like your content, which included what I found to be, at the very least, mostly true, that we understand it in a right picture and understand the Catholic perspective of all these things. Like, hey, certain canons, they're not infallible. Mistakes can be made. Disciplines aren't doctrine. And we can make mistakes on disciplines. I don't think everything there was anti-Semitic in the sense that I mean anti-Semitic, and you understand what I'm referencing. But I definitely realize there have been some people who are anti-Semitic in the general sense and have been Catholic, and it's a black mark, you know?
Yeah, yeah. What I kind of find like it seems like there are few people who are willing, both on the Protestant side and on the Catholic side. There are few people who are willing to kind of just, wash their hands and be like, yeah, man, like the 16th century and before, there are some nasty dudes back then, like
yes, there were. You saw them in my comment section, or maybe it's your comment section, maybe it was my comment section, where somebody was like, what's your problem with the Albigensian Crusade? And I was like, are you kidding me? Are you being this dishonest? Like, you can be Catholic and recognize that some Catholic people have done nasty things, right? Peter denied Jesus Christ. In the eyes of the Catholic, that's like one of the worst things you can do. But he's Catholic. And so, you might disagree. I don't know what your feelings are on Peter. You're not Protestant, but.
No, yeah. So I think that there's a certain amount of like chest thumping that people like to do on YouTube, where it's like, oh, if I'm Catholic, then I have to defend the Catholic thing no matter what. Even if that thing is the Albigensian Crusade, even if all the like informed Catholics are like, dude, you don't have to defend this. This is pretty bad, guys. Like, there's some.
I think what's going on is that Catholic apologetics, I don't know how close of a handle you have on Catholic apologetics.
Too close.
And what's going on, but for those of you who don't know, like Catholic apologetics is dominating the apologetic scene right now. Like evangelicals, they don't win debates anymore. Protestants, they don't win debates anymore. We see that, like, James White is on the losing streak of the century. Catholic apologetics are on top, and what happens is you have role models in the front who are doing amazing at defending Catholic apologetics. They're getting the troops riled up, if you will. And then you've got all these other people who have 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers. You know, I'm somebody who only has a couple thousand on YouTube and almost 6,000 on TikTok. So I'm not like that far ahead of them. But you've got a lot of like what I like to call minions like myself who see that and get excited, and they don't want to admit there's a problem with anything. Even stuff they're allowed to admit that was wrong. I mean, you have to admit it. If you're a Catholic, you believe the Crusades, they were well intentioned. Like it was a response to Muslim expansionists, and the intention governmentally in the church was to stop the Muslim expansionists. But you also have to recognize that like innocent Jews were slaughtered at random sometimes by troops who may have been anti-Semitic or just for whatever reason looking for target practice, and very immoral things happened during the Crusades. That doesn't mean the Pope told the troops to go out and force women, Jewish women, and murder their husbands and steal their babies and sell them. And it doesn't mean those things. You can admit rough things happened and still be a Catholic. It's necessary sometimes if you're going to win somebody over, because people see through that stuff. That's not genuine.
Yeah, whenever I see another like anime profile picture, like 15-year-old in my comment section telling me that like, people call me Jewish all the time. And I'm like, guys, my real last name is O'Connor. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm not Jewish. But they do this as like some kind of like, they think they're insulting me or something. And like, I don't even think it's insulting, because I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't care. Like, cool. Like, what if I was? I'm not, but what if I was?
Whatever.
Whenever I see another 16-year-old with a anime profile picture calling me Jewish, like it doesn't even register anymore, because it's just chest thumping. That's all. It's just ooga booga. Me on Catholic team. So me repeat everything that. Yeah, not even repeat. Me just kind of. Say the thing that I, the edgy thing. And
watching Crusader edits.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I just don't think that's particular. So not only do I think that kind of attitude is like dishonest, because I do think that's like a dishonest attitude to have. I also think it's like bad for the cause. Like, because I think that like, I just told you, I just finished telling you that like they don't even register anymore. But I have a feeling that like subconsciously it moves me further away each time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, and I'm not saying consciously, because I know like my rational brain knows that, there could be a million Catholics who are out there saying that the Crusades were good. And that doesn't mean that the official Catholic position is, nothing like that is the case. Yeah. But
the Catholic Church has apologized for the mistreatment of Jews. It apologized for like the mistreatment of Galileo. Like the rad trad like anime profile picture Catholic who converted because he saw a bunch of Byzantine, and Crusader edits. What they're spouting out when you're like, oh, this happened, and there was this anti-Semitism in this century, and they're in your comment section like, good, they deserved it. Like, this is not the attitude that the Vatican takes. This isn't pastorally what the church is handing down to the parishioners. You are in opposition to what they're telling you. They're, especially per Vatican II, like the charity we're supposed to be expressing to people of other faiths has the way the Catholic views those things has dramatically changed since Vatican II. And you just, the internet, man. I mean, it does something to these kids.
It does. Yeah. That's why I try to limit myself on social media. The only social media that I use like a lot is YouTube. And even then I try not to overdo it, I guess. But I'm largely anti-social media, which I understand is not good for growing a channel, but I also don't care. This is a hobby for me. It's not, it's not my living or anything. But if we're doing too much agreeing right now, far too much agreeing. So I want to see if I can maybe get to a point where we might disagree.
Let's break out the boxing gloves.
Let's do it. So here's a statement that I'll let you say agree or disagree.
Okay.
Those canons from the Fourth Lateran Council, I will put forward that those are anti-Semitic, like particularly the ones that prohibit Jews from being seen in public on certain holy days,
Mhm.
particularly those that enforce a certain dress code for Jews, um, those that prevent Jews from holding public offices. Uh,
Yeah.
my proposition is those are anti-Semitic, and I wonder if you disagree.
If by anti-Semitic you mean racist, I disagree.
Because Jewish isn't a race.
Well, I mean, if those things were in place, those things are in place to prevent people of the Jewish faith from achieving public office, and those are inhibitions on people of the Jewish faith. I think that those prohibitions would exist for somebody who is not ethnically Jewish but practiced the Jewish faith. I don't think that they would have seen a difference between the two.
Um, I agree. I think that they would equally apply to Jewish converts and cradle Jews.
Yeah.
I agree.
And conversely, they likely didn't apply to Christians who were ethnically Jewish but didn't practice the religion of Judaism. Because I mean, you can't hide from the fact that the apostles in Christ were Jewish. So it's pretty hard to be like racist against Jews if you're a Christian.
I
Some to
agree.
manage.
Yeah, I don't think that somebody who had Jewish parents but converted 30 years ago and is now like a 50-year-old man or something, I don't think that that person would be subject to those same laws. I still agree. But despite all that, I still think it's anti-Semitic because you're discriminating against somebody based on their religion, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
If you mean the very broad definition of anti-Semitic, which includes the discrimination of people based on their religion, then yeah, I agree. I don't think there's as much of a problem with that as like racism. Racism, I want to make sure you guys understand because we're throwing around the word anti-Semitism in here. I do not believe in racism. Racism does not exist. No, I'm just kidding. Racism does exist, but you should never be racist. I would don't have a problem with any person who's not, bleeding red, white, and blue. It's okay.
and let me tee up some, let me kind of like lob some balls for you to hit over the fence now. Are you actively advocating for those canons from the Fourth Lateran Council to be enacted in the U.S. today?
No,
There
no,
you go.
absolutely
So
not.
we could put that whole thing to bed.
There were
Yeah.
responses. There were canons in responses to things that were happening in that society. And I have to say that they're authoritative, but we're not living in that society today. So it would never apply to us. So I would never want to enact them because trying to enforce those laws in society today would be improperly applying those laws. Those laws weren't meant to be enforced
Ooh.
1,000 years later. They were for then.
So do you think that it was like a good thing that those laws were enacted back when the Fourth Lateran, was that the 13th century or something? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
do you think that was a good thing in the 13th century?
So it depends on the laws. I have to be obedient to the church, and I can't say that a person back then should disobey those laws. But I will say, like in a Christian dominant Europe, where most people are Christian and they're practicing Catholics, it makes logical sense to say we don't want somebody who is religiously Jewish ruling over us because they don't share our values. And I would say the same thing for a Jewish country who is the majority is religiously Jewish. Um, I would say the same thing for a Muslim country. Here's the thing: is I don't think it's immoral for like Saudi Arabia. I don't know what the laws are in Saudi Arabia are, but I don't think it's immoral for them to say the person who rules over Saudi Arabia should be Muslim. That's not immoral because somebody who's Muslim would reflect the values of the people in that country. So I think laws like that are prudent. And yes, they discriminate against a particular religion, but not every country has to be the U.S.
So do you think that like England and France would be prudent to start enacting laws that would, prevent non-Muslims from holding office, appearing in public on certain days, stuff like that? And
It depends
let's
on.
steelman my question too. Let's fast forward by 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And
Sure.
now let's
Yeah.
say that England and France are 51% Muslim.
Yeah. So obviously, because I'm a Christian, I think everybody ought to be Christian, but we're going to ignore that for a couple seconds and just ask if the laws are prudent. And from my perspective, sin is never prudent. And if you are a Catholic, you can't agree that sin is prudent. So you can't say that being Muslim is like ever prudent. But let's just say, does it make sense in 20, 30 years? Let's say 60, 70% of the population is Muslim. Then yeah, that makes sense to say, hey, it reflects these countries, uh, the country's values, because the value of a country can change, obviously, right? Like the values that Americans held have changed dramatically from like 60 years ago until today. It doesn't mean that the values expressed by most of the people in this country are not the values of the country. Things just evolve. So if England, if the UK is going the direction that it's been going for the last decade, and kind of have been integrating a Muslim population, and it continues that, then yeah, at some point, I mean, it's going to be a Muslim country, and they're going to want to elect somebody who shares their values. And this, this already happens in the United States in democracy. The person who is elected likely shares the values of the majority. It's just, it happens a little bit differently than in other countries.
Yeah, yeah. So would you, I think the word that you use, like, it just makes sense, for them, like for a Muslim majority country to like prohibit non-Muslims from holding public office. Um, would you say that it's good?
Yeah.
It's good for them to do that.
No, I can't say it's good, because I think what's good for them is to convert for the Christian faith. So
Mm.
I can't affirm that that's good. I can just affirm that in human wisdom, that makes sense. If Christianity is not true, then I can't call the laws of Lateran IV good. I can only call them in some way prudent.
Um, because you are a Catholic, does that mean that you would look at the laws of Lateran IV and say that those were good? At least in the 13th
Yes,
century?
yes, for the majority of them. There's some things that I find kind of harsh, and I've had some people suggest to me, and I've got to do the reading, that there was some interesting persecutions from both Jews and Muslims in Cordova, Spain, and that spurred a little bit uh, some of the laws that were put forward in Lateran IV. But I'm not going to try and fool you guys and claim that that's true, because I've got to do the reading, and it's kind of a lot of reading, and I've got 2 kids and 2 jobs, and so I've got to get to that. So I want to make sure that I'm being clear with you guys. Somebody's put that forward to me, and I've got to just validate it and make sure it's actually true. There's certain of those laws that kind of strike at my heart a little bit. I would say Jews having to dress differently, and not being allowed in public during Holy Week. Those things I feel less comfortable with. I'm glad that they're not infallible, because that would trouble me more than they already do.
Yeah. Um, if they are good, those laws, and if the U.S. is a majority Christian country today, what's stopping you from saying that, like, yeah, no, you do think it would be a good thing for the U.S. to pass laws that just mirror those
Mm-hmm.
canons from Lateran IV today? Like, there might, though, I perhaps see somewhat of like an incongruity there, you know?
Mm-hmm. The difference is that America is an experiment, right? It's a democratic experiment. And so that's not how we elect people. I'm not saying that democracy is the only way to run a country, but the values of the United States are democratic. And so for a country that values the freedom and the vote of the people, if they pass a law that only a Christian person, let's say the majority of the country is Christian, can uh, only a Christian can be in public office, then what happens when the population slowly turns minority Christian? What do we do with that law then? And so it's much, much safer and much more congruent with the values of democracy that we not have that law. And I'm not saying that every single country ought to or should be a democracy. Those are American values. I'm American second. I'm Catholic first. I have more loyalty to towards my faith and my country. And so I don't necessarily think or know that democracy is the best way to run a country. But if your country is going to be democratic, I think it goes against the values of that country to say, well, the person in power needs to be this religion. Let the people vote for that.
Let's say they did. Let's say that we have a pure
Yeah.
democracy, and 51% of the population did vote for those laws. Do you think,
Mm-hmm.
or in a republic, if we wanted to kind of talk more about the U.S., the people
Yeah.
who we elect to vote on our behalf. Let's say that 51% of them did vote for those laws. Would your reaction be like, oh, good, it's a good thing?
Well, I don't know if it would be a my gut reaction would be good. I'm glad that we would have a Christian in office, but I would also recognize that that seems to be contrary to the American value. But I also don't derive my morals from what is American in nature. And so America obviously is an evolving country, and if America survives another 200 years, it's going to look and feel totally different then than it does today. And so while I would say, hey, this goes against the values of America, I would also, in a certain way, be like, okay, great, according to my values, um, I would rather have a Christian in office than non-Christian.
Yeah. So was that a way of saying that you would say good, um, even though you recognize that it might be anti-American, because
Hmm.
um, what's American doesn't matter. It's what's Catholic that matters.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably fair. That was my way of saying it nicely
Yeah.
without sounding like I'm advocating for like a dictatorship or something.
No, no. But this is something that I think is like a legitimate point of disagreement. Because I can quite easily say, no, I don't. I would not ever be in favor of forcing Jews to not appear in public on certain days. Where it
Mhm.
seems like for you, there are hypothetical circumstances where you would be in favor of such a thing, even though we don't live in a country today that
Yeah.
fits those circumstances. But there could be
And
circumstances in which you would be
yeah,
in favor.
I should say that there were circumstances in that era that led Christians to do things like that that didn't they weren't purely racist or anything like that, and I don't know that they necessarily justify it completely, but I will say that it wasn't unreasonable. There were, and listen guys, if you've got kids, I'm going to be as PG as I can, but sometimes it's impossible to be perfectly PG. Giving you a
It's
warning
true.
about what I'm about to say. There were oral traditions that made its way to writing traditions that Mary was taken advantage of and sexually assaulted by a Roman soldier while she was on her period, and Jesus is kind of like this monstrous product from Mary's rape, and like that is to like the ears of the 13th century Catholic, that's like chewing on glass. And so you can only imagine like the emotions that a Christian majority, a Catholic majority country hears when somebody that's precious to them, like Jesus Christ, right, who is most precious to them, is blasphemed, and then his mother, who is also precious, is spoken in a way where her sexual assault is graphically, almost comedically discussed, by a Roman, by a pagan, a kind of person that Christians tend to not really care for, and in an unclean way, like on her period. Like those things are just disgusting. And so when just think about an age before the internet, an age where people are maybe not quite as enlightened as us, and you're just like a farmer who goes to mass who thinks everybody in the world is Christian, and you hear, hey, these Jewish people, they say these things about our mother in Jesus Christ. And of course you're going to be like, something has to be done about this. If you put yourself in that perspective and you take away maybe some of the values you learn from being more aware of the entire world, that seems to make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with anything that you just said about it making sense. Here's the thing. In the 13th century, people had 13th century values. And I know that's shocking to some people, but you know, we humans, this whole like,
Different rules.
yeah, we haven't been civil for that long. We really haven't. And if you look at the actions that we took, I mean, even honestly, even just 100 years ago, we don't have to go 700 years ago or whatever to look at some really awful actions that we humans have taken. I am likewise not at all surprised to find laws that I find to be repulsive. And that
Mm-hmm.
is a word that I am repulsed by the idea that a nation would make it illegal for people of a certain religion to be out in public on certain days, or you know, they had to wear a Star of David or whatever to you know,
Yeah.
I'm repulsed by
I,
that.
I will say that that still I don't think reflects necessarily the values of that day. And I would say that even though some of those canons and the canons in question, they're not infallible and mistakes can be made, you know, disciplines are not infallible. I will say they reflect a better piety than the values of the rest of the world. Because as you know, the medieval world is brutal. And the fact that these Christians weren't like kill all the Jews reflects maybe not the greatest values, but higher values than maybe a lot of the rest of the world would have shared. And so I think still, if you can maybe you can't call it a virtuous thing to say Jewish people have to never be seen in public on in Holy Week. Maybe we can't call that virtuous, but in relation to what the rest of the world or how the rest of the world would have responded, I think they're in a better situation probably.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
would you go as far as to say that it was straight up not virtuous for the Fourth Lateran Council to put forward those canons? And I ask this especially in light of the discussion that we had just a few minutes ago, where we were talking about whether
Yeah.
it'd be good or not. And I think that we settled on it would be good for the United States to enact these things as long as 51%, you know, if we were pure democracy, or 51% of our elected representatives voted, and we all agreed that it was you know, that we should go ahead and enact these restrictions on religious minorities. So is it possible that something could be good but not necessarily virtuous?
No, I don't believe something can be good but not virtuous because I don't. As a Catholic, you have to affirm that sin is never prudent, and so I do think that what happened there. This is Andy who does not always understand all of the cultural significance that we're going around. Who knows? Maybe there was like a Jewish Unabomber, and you know, the medieval people got freaked out, you know, and said Jewish people shouldn't be in public. You know, you never know. Okay, I don't understand every ounce of the historical context, but from my perspective, I think the modern day church, the Vatican II church, would be opposed to that kind of treatment.
It
And
would,
so,
for
as a
sure.
son of the modern church, I have to say that I would not be for that treatment today, and that I don't understand what was happening back then. But if something like that came up today, I would be completely against it.
Yeah, as would virtually every single person who is in a position of
Mhm.
power sitting over there in the Vatican. Uh, Virtually
Yeah.
100% of them would oppose. You know, if one bishop brought forward those canons today, every single other bishop would vote against. I'm convinced of that. Yeah. Um, but that's easy for me to say as somebody who doesn't, you know, doesn't kind of bind myself to the authority of the Catholic Church. Because I can just be like, yeah, man, like 13th century people had 13th century morals. Like it sucked back then. Like, you know, like that's how it was. And I think that the Catholic has to be maybe just a little bit more political than I was right there, right? Because the Catholic has to
Yeah.
say something to the effect of like, well, this was a council. It is binding, and it is authoritative. Uh, Even if all of the sections are not infallible, unless they're talking about faith and morals. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but you know,
I,
authoritative
I,
is
I think we have to ask: Did the people who suggested and passed those canons did they have evil in their heart? I think we have that's a maybe a better question to ask because we can say, well, you know, sin is never prudent, and if you know we applied or tried this kind of thing in the modern day world, knowing what we know would never get passed, and those are all helpful things to say. But you have to ask yourself, like, did the bishops intend to like hurt people when they did this, or did they truly think that this was prudent considering the circumstances of the day? And as a Catholic, I'm bound to be charitable to my Catholic brothers and sisters. And so, unless there's a reason for me to believe otherwise, I have to believe, hey, these bishops were just ignorant in some way. And they were doing what they truly thought was best. Even if they were wrong, I don't think they were harboring evil in their heart when they did this. I don't think they understood. Um, that would be kind of my minimalist approach to the situation.
Let me agree with you, but then let me also kind of make it more personal. I am utterly convinced that if you put me back into the 13th century, the 12th century, whatever, I would I would have 13th century morals, you know? Like
Yes.
if I lived in Alabama in the 1920s, I would
Thank
probably be
you.
racist.
Yes.
You know, like it's just I'm not
Yes,
special.
you would.
I'm not special.
We
I'm
always pretend that we're somehow better than
right.
these people. Like if I existed 1,000 years ago, I wouldn't be like doing all these things. Yes, you
No.
would. You're
Right.
just a
Yeah.
person. From a purely secular standpoint and from even a Christian standpoint, we're the same kind of people as back then. And the only reason we don't behave these ways is because the world has become more enlightened and there's less violence. You got to understand it's not just the Christian world who has to be in some ways enlightened. Now I understand the Christian world, in my opinion, has the light of Jesus Christ, and that hasn't changed throughout the centuries. Like obviously we make progressions in science, obviously we make progressions in sociology and whatnot, and we learn how to have a better society and govern better, right? The Bible isn't a guide on how to govern a country, and the world can be made a better place in a secular sense. And so and so geez, where was I going with this? Oh my gosh. Yeah, and so you're the same kind of person. Nothing has changed. Like maybe if you existed millions of years ago, you'd be doing different things, but you're not. We're talking about 1,000 years ago. Same kind of person. It's your environment, right? You're not only a product of your environment, but in a way, at least part of you is a product.
A a real big part. A real big part. I mean,
Real big part, yeah. It affects the way you think,
yeah.
right? I mean, you're like in a hut and it's raining every single day, and every single time there's a winter, one of your siblings dies, right? And there's a plague, and there's dead people all around. You go out your front yard, and there's a big carriage filled with gray dead people, and like death is not like a hard thing to wrap your mind around. You get to a point where you're like, he died. So of course the punishment for stuff is going to be like burning at the stake, or you're going to be quicker to take somebody's life or something because death is not a big deal to you, right?
100%. Um, and and here's my kind of perspective here is that, like yeah, like if I was a bishop in the 13th century, I would probably have those exactly. I would be anti-Semitic probably, um,
Mm-hmm.
and and then I don't have a problem just kind of being like yeah no, the church was anti-Semitic in, you know, up until the rest of the world, you know, until we all kind of learned better. Um, but guess, you know, it's not only the Catholics, right? Clear, this whole conversation started talking about Luther's anti-Semitism, so it's not like this is a uniquely
Mm-hmm.
Catholic problem. The Protestants,
No.
around the time of Luther, also anti-Semitic. The Orthodox, also anti-Semitic. So like I don't think it's a uniquely Catholic problem, but I think it's a problem that affected the Catholics just like it affected everyone else, and it affected ecumenical
You
councils.
bring up a good point. You bring up a good point in mentioning maybe some problematic Catholics in history, and I don't think John Chrysostom is maybe doing anything different than just the Fourth Lateran Council. I think it's about the Jewish faith less than the Jewish race. However, you bring up a valid point when it comes to Lutheranism and Luther himself. And I said this in the video. Like we've got to stop saying, you know, Luther said X, Y, and Z. Luther broke his vows of celibacy and caused a nun to do the same, and so his church isn't invalid. And it's like, have you read Catholic history? What
Right.
the question you have to get down to, because there's the claim that Christianity makes is not that every single Christian is like some beaming light of righteousness. That's what we'd want to be. I want to be a good testimony for people. I want to live a morally upstanding life and be a beam of light for other people so that they can in some way be inspired by me. I want that. But the reality is that we're not all going to be that. And so they pretend suddenly like that's what is expected of the faithful in the church. But Christ, he uh he anticipates this problem and he gives us confession, right? He tells the apostles that whoever sins you forgive, they're forgiven, and if you do not forgive people's sins, they are not forgiven. Like from the beginning of Christian history, it is built into the Christian faith that some Christians are going to suck. In fact, most of you are. And so they kind of get onto Luther for sucking, and it's like, dude.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the whole point of my video too, was just to be like hey guys, like before we go picking on Luther, like let's read some Chrysostom. Because, and the not to pick on the poor kid who I'm about to pick on. I'm not picking on him. He said something that I disagreed with. He said something to the effect of, kind of weird for a Protestant hero to be so anti-Semitic. And one of the reasons I picked on Chrysostom is because he's a Catholic hero. I mean, not only is he a saint, but he's a doctor of the church. So he's definitely a Catholic hero. So
I think the quote you read me, I agree with too. So I mean, I'm not gonna gaslight you. I don't remember what the quote was, so I might be really pushing my foot in my mouth if the quote comes back and it's really bad. But I think I remember being like, oh yeah, that's fine. I can agree with that. But yeah, the thing you got to remember is that Protestants don't care that much about Luther. I'm sorry to say this. Like a lot of Protestants do, but they don't really base the validity on their church on Luther's his morality either. They don't care about that. They know Luther was like a rough guy. Like if half of what's in Luther's table talks is true, you're like, Luther kind of sucked, Oh my gosh, this guy, maybe recognized a problem in the church and we're grateful for that, but like he wasn't exactly a role model, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I do think that the amount of hero worship that your average Catholic might assume Protestants do about people like Luther is overstated. I don't.
It's because of their feelings on the saints.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And hey,
that's how they see things.
To be fair, saints were a huge part of my life growing up, like huge. Like to the point where we didn't do Halloween, we did All Saints Day. So we would dress up like our favorite saint, Yeah. So like saints were huge in, we would watch the saint story movies and stuff. We would read the books from Tan Publishing about the lives of the saints. The Tan Publishing book about Saint John Marie Vianney called The Curie of Ars. That's the name of the book. And it's written in the first person, and like Saint John Vianney is telling you like, hey, it's me, Saint John Vianney. I'm in heaven now, but I'm writing about what I did when I was still on earth. And like that book is the reason why my confirmation name is John Vianney. So that makes my full name Kevin James John Marie Vianney O'Connor the Fourth. I added the fourth. It's not really
there. You go.
But so I do get it. The saints are a big deal to Catholics, so maybe Catholics assuming that Protestants make a big deal about Luther is not so far-fetched. I'll cut him a break on that.
Can I ask you something personal?
Yeah, of course. I've been the one.
This might be super personal.
I'm an open book.
So you don't have to answer this question. But look, I'm going to say it, okay? To be funny, okay? I don't want my kids to turn out like you.
No, I say the same thing.
I feel the pain of your father. I feel the pain of your father. Because I see my father and in your father. And like my dad's this big, tough, macho guy who never stops working. And like listening to him cry over the phone is super painful. And I don't want to be that someday. And in some way, all men are like they're doomed to become their father. What did your dad do that made you leave the Catholic faith? Because I'm thinking like I want my son to be Catholic when he's older. I don't want to chase him away. But in your story, your dad is like doing everything he can. He's like exposing you to the saints. He's helping you learn Latin. He's bringing you to church. And still there was like a disruption. I know some of this has to do with some unfortunate events that took place between you, your family regarding your wife. And I think that's totally inappropriate. Is it just that? Or was there something about your raising that I should just not do for my kid if I want him to stay Catholic?
Yeah, man, what a great question. And something that I should say too is there's no way that my dad knows I have a channel. He does not watch. But I'll say this even though he won't watch. My dad is not the reason why I'm not Catholic. I'm not Catholic despite my dad's best efforts, not because of anything that he did. Um,
Mhm.
and all the stuff with my wife actually happened as a result of me telling my parents that I didn't believe. So it's not so much that like the unfortunate circumstances with my wife, which may or may not have been, inappropriate. Um, those things didn't cause me to leave either, because it was me telling my parents, hey, I don't, because I still lived at home. I was 22. So I told my parents, I no longer believe. Also, I got a job offer that's going to move me far away. And when I do move out in like 3 months, my girlfriend is moving with me. And then they were like, oh, no, if you still want to be part of this family, you'll be married by then. So I got married. So that's like the order. So even if we might agree that my parents didn't handle that situation properly, that's still not the reason why I left. That's my leaving came before. But what caused me to leave? In some way, and this isn't going to be like there's nothing. So I'm a victim of my dad's success in a way. My dad was so good at all the Catholic stuff that I became like a voracious reader of all this Catholic stuff. I think a large part of why I ultimately wound up leaving was I realized that I just didn't feel in my heart that it was wrong to, and again, trying to keep this PG, but just non-heterosexual relationship. Didn't think were wrong. I didn't. Like when my friend came out to me, I was like, oh, I know I'm supposed to think that this is wrong, but in my heart, I don't feel like it is. So let me figure out why. Instead of just kind of being like, the church is wrong on this one.
You're breaking up a bit. You're frozen.
Ooh, okay. I'll back up a. Yeah, I do see that where I'm having some buffering.
You're kind of back now. It's
okay.
Better. Very pixelated. I can hear you. Yeah.
All right. Well, we will push on. I think that if I had been a little bit more cafeteria in my Catholicism, I would have been more easily able to be like, yeah, I'm Catholic. I just don't really care about the Catholic stance on like marriage. But I did care and I wanted to know. And so I launched like really hard. Like I started reading a lot about teleology. And also like when I realized that, I didn't agree with the church on teleology, then I was like, well, let me get into, realism, that's substances and accidents and all that. And then when I realized I didn't agree there, I was like, ooh, geez, like, well, let me start doing some like biblical history kind of stuff. And I think that it was me being a victim of my dad's success. If I was raised more nominally Catholic, I might still be Catholic, a nominal Catholic, but a Catholic.
Yeah.
But,
I'd rather you be this because at least you can know you're wrong, whereas a nominal Catholic.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather be me than a nominal Catholic too, but that's easy for me to say. Other things though is I think that my family pushed really hard, and this is very normal in the community that I grew up in, but my family pushed really hard on things like Marian apparition. Oh, and we should talk about if you have time, we can talk about like the rosary and stuff like that.
Let's do that. Let's do that next.
Perfect. But let me finish giving you a good answer. Well, as good of an answer as I can muster anyway. But my family really pushed Marian apparitions like Fatima, like Lourdes. So here's an example. My uncle passed away before I was born. My dad's brother. He got cancer and he ultimately passed away from it. But this would have been in the mid 80s or something like that. And then I was born in the mid 90s. But my grandparents brought him to Lourdes in hope for a miracle. So that's like how serious my family is about Marian apparitions. And the rosary, right? We take that very seriously. And there's all these quote unquote optional, right? I make a joke. How optional is Fatima when your chapel is named Our Lady of Fatima Chapel? But all these, like Fatima is optional, quote unquote. But my family made a huge deal about Fatima. And I don't think that's good for somebody's faith, if I'm being blunt. Same thing with all these Marian apparitions and Eucharistic miracles and stuff like that. I think that all these kind of tangential things are probably not good to put too much emphasis on for your kids.
It's fundamentalism.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like some of that some of that coming to life of those Protestants who critique the Catholic Church, and they say, you guys care about your Lady of Lourdes and Fatima and the Rosary and your Eucharistic miracles. You guys care about that more than Christ. And it's like, okay, well, Catholicism as a whole, I don't think it does. But some people, oh yeah, there's some problems out there. And the Catholic Church doesn't say you as a Catholic have to affirm this miracle. Like you have to believe that, like Saint Dominic receives these promises from Mary. These are like pious traditions that you're welcome to just say, I don't find it convincing. But you've got some people that are like, you will believe in this, and you invest your trust in that. And then later, when you're an adult, and you say, well, the evidence isn't as good. The evidence doesn't say it didn't happen that way, but the evidence doesn't really suggest that it did. And so I don't know if I could be Catholic anymore. And even if somebody comes in and they say, well, you don't have to believe in those things, it's still so ingrained emotionally as a part of your faith that when you find out it's not true, it's like they ripped your heart out. You know, it's like Ken
100%.
Ham finding out that Jesus Christ did rise from the dead, but also the earth is millions of years old. I don't like it. It would just tear him limb from limb.
It would.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and that's another thing too is my word of advice is don't raise your kids to be young earth creationists because for me I was so staunchly young earth creationist that when I got to high school, I was that kid who raised my hand and was like when the teacher was like, "Does anybody here think that dinosaurs and man walked side by side?" I was like, "Yeah, I do." Clearly I was dissuaded of that by the time that I like was done with high school.
Yeah.
But I think that and I had priests telling me it's okay to be an old earth creationist. Like that's cool. You don't have
Yeah.
to believe that the earth. But I was it you know, everyone around me believed that the earth was only 6,000 years old. So when I learned that it
Mm.
wasn't, it very quickly turned into like a, oh wow, if
What
if
else is not true?
exactly everyone I knew and
Yeah.
trusted told me that this was true and it's not. What about everything
Yeah.
else that these people told me, you know? Um
I had
so
the same experience. I was like atheist for like about a year, like a closeted atheist, because like seeing the improbability of like a young Earth, like a global flood, was enough momentum that I didn't even feel the need to like look into the resurrection, and I was enough momentum as a fundamentalist for me to be like, well, there's so many people who don't believe it, and the flood is in this, is kind of in this condition, and same with the young Earth creationism, and like it probably just isn't true. And invested my trust so much, it wasn't until probably a year later that I was like, you're just going with the crowd, and you haven't even studied the evidence. And I just was like, okay, I need to buckle down and see if maybe I was fearful that if I looked into Jesus Christ, that it would be the same thing as when I looked into like the flood. That there would be like all this surface level evidence that would be like, okay, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I never thought about that before. And obviously, the flood couldn't have happened or the resurrection couldn't have happened because of X, Y, and Z. So that's done. Because it was just like that for me to be like, a global flood. It doesn't seem likely, It was like a few minutes.
if you don't mind me asking, where are you at today in terms of like the whole Noah's Ark story? Do you find yourself pretty
Hmm.
firmly in the like it's a myth and I don't care category, or do you
Hmm.
find yourself more like, well,
So
there was some kind of historical truth to it?
how I always answer this question, and I'll do better than this after I answer it the way I always answer it, is that when God gives us the story of the flood, he's not trying to give us history. Whether it's history or not, that's besides the point. He is trying to communicate something theologically to us. And we find that message in the book of Peter when Peter talks about the flood and how through water the entire earth was cleansed of sin and it saved this remnant in the ark that was righteous. And baptism now is like that, and it saves us. And we find like the significance of the flood, like God's purifying power on us. We find that theological truth in the story of the flood. We find these motifs thousands, I don't know where you are on the dating of the writing of Genesis, but we find these truths like at least like around 1,000 years before the New Testament, where like why in the world would God call Abraham righteous and his family righteous. Like you and I know, like the Bible doesn't really support that anybody but God can just be righteous and just be pure. But it presents Abraham as like this pure remnant in his family. And everybody else, it presents them as like purely wicked, right? There's not like a single good person on this earth, right? There's nobody who loves God. And not only is there nobody who loves God, but there's not even a single person who has a good thought in their mind. Their thoughts are entirely wicked. And so we find this huge like contrast between Noah and his family and the rest of the world. And through water, God cleanses the world. And what we're supposed to learn from that is baptism. And that's the truth that the New Testament pulls out of that. The maximalist case, in my opinion, large local deluge. I don't know if there is, and that's, bold of me to say, if anybody I used to know catches his podcast, you're not even a Christian anymore.
Right.
Maximalist case, local deluge. There's, from what I understand, I'm not an archaeologist or geologist, that there were, 6,000, 5,000, 7,000 years ago, there were a lot of large local deluges, and the story could have been based off of something miraculous that happened. I'm a theist, right? I believe in God. I believe God does miracles. I wouldn't put it past God, even though today the motif of Noah's Ark seems like a kid's story. It hasn't always existed as like a children's story. That I wouldn't say that God is incapable of gathering animals from a region together in a boat to survive a flood, right? But then I ask myself, well, why doesn't God just lead Noah and his family and the animals out of that area instead of making him build a boat for 125 years? By the way, that's a pretty long time. And so I'm on the side that I don't care. I know that God is God. God can make anything happen. God could have created the world 10 minutes ago and endowed all of us with the memory we have today. I don't know. Those questions aren't important for me to answer, because the important question for me to ask has already been answered in Peter. And so I'm going to affirm science. I'm not going to tell my kids, when your science teacher tells you about X, Y, and Z, you shouldn't listen. That's none of my business. I'm not a scientist. It's my business to teach my son why the Genesis account of the flood matters. And it's not a historical debate. It's about baptism. It's about God cleansing us of sin. That's what I'll tell my kid. Everything else, that's none of my business. I don't know. I'm not an expert.
I think that's a great attitude to have. I think that's fantastic. I think the kind of looking at somebody confused and be like, what do you mean? Is it true? Like, who cares? Like, if you can't tell, I'm a big fiction reader. This is all fiction over here. I love my high fantasy books. I just finished the Bloodsworn trilogy. That's these 3 books right here.
Okay.
But if somebody said to me like, yeah, but is the Bloodsworn trilogy true? I would like look at them funny and be like, what? Like,
yeah,
that's a weird question to ask.
Have you ever heard fundamentalists lead? Like fundamentalists, they love that. Do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior? They love that. And I love talking about Jesus Christ. I just don't wake people up on Saturday morning to do it. But have you ever noticed that some fundamentalists, I've seen this, start their proposition of the Christian faith with the flood or with creation? Like, what would you do if the earth was really only 6,000 years old? And I'm like, what would you do if I shoved my boot so far? Like, why are you talking about this? This has nothing to do with the gospel. This is like, do you have time to talk about Jesus and then going on about Lot and his wife? It's like, is that really where you want to be right now? Is this really the best way to do this? In my church, and like even, I've literally, you can listen to what's his name, like Ray Comfort, go on and on about like creation.
Banana Man.
The Banana Man. Have you seen the Banana video? Like, that's wild, dude. Like, why are you putting so much time, Ken Ham? Why are you putting so much time, Ray Comfort, in trying to prove your cosmology when this has nothing to do with the gospel message? Literally, the Genesis account 1 through 11 could be entirely allegorical or literally true in every single literal sense. Would not matter one bit to the gospel of Christ. Doesn't have anything to do with it. The message is the same. So stop being crazy. I don't know why so many Christians have to be like, Jesus Christ loves you. Also, pigeons are government watchdogs, and they're watching you through your window. Like,
Well, that one is true.
Why do you guys have to do that to us, man? Like, I liked you for a second.
I'm fully on board that birds aren't real. Birds are government drones.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to offend you. I caught one the other day, and I couldn't find the camera anywhere inside of it.
They're tricky like that. The government's good. They hide them.
I don't think it's the birds. I think they're putting camera in the fish. Honestly.
Oh, that's a new one.
Water.
I haven't heard that one yet. No, yeah, I think that's exactly the right attitude to have. That was not the attitude that I was raised with. Not the attitude you were raised with either. But I think that's the right attitude to have.
It's also much easier to defend the resurrection than it is to defend a global flood or a 6-day creation, 5 to 10,000 years ago. The evidence is much better. And you might not consider the evidence to be convincing enough for you to believe in the resurrection. It is for me, but you have to at least admit that the resurrection is much more defensible of a position.
Oh, 1,000%. Let's just start with the fact that there's only one Genesis, right? And there's 4 Gospels, like right off, right off of the bat, I think that the resurrection is off to a much stronger start. How about the fact that the Gospels were written within decades of the events that the Gospels portray, not
the
thousands of years later?
That's an easy one. Autonomic congruence is an easy one. Extra Christian attestation to Jesus Christ suffering the ultimate punishment, or the crucifixion. It's like even secular historians will agree that Jesus Christ lived. There was a man named Jesus who was considered a great teacher and worked miracles, and he died through crucifixion, and his disciples and many others claimed that he rose from the dead. Like, they will give you that. So like the case for Jesus Christ is like halfway, 50% just made by people who aren't even Christians. It's way easier to make that case.
Oh, I agree, and it's not even close. Like it's if we give somebody a knife and we give somebody else an M1 Abrams tank, who's gonna win that fight? That's the level of not even close that we're talking.
Some people think they can win the fight.
That's true. I mean, Ken Ham does put up a good fight with his knife. I've been to the Ark Encounter. It's actually, I live like an hour from it, not even 45 minutes.
Dude, it's got to be cool. It's got to be fun. I mean, don't pretend like you didn't enjoy yourself.
I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty cool. You know what's funny too is that Ken Ham does like a good job making you like he doesn't want you to think of the Ark as like this childhood story. Like, he wants you to think of it as like really freaky.
Feels very real.
Yeah, he goes out of his way to be like, no, this was awful and terrifying. And like, the first thing that you do when you enter the Ark is you hear like the sound of the storm outside, and the lights are off, and there's like lightning flash, like not real lightning, of course, but like he's trying to freak you out. And I mean, he does a good job too. Like, it's scary when it's haunted house vibes when you go in.
Can we appreciate for a moment that the Noah's Ark tale is not for kids? It is a story about God wiping out almost all of the human race and all life on Earth. It is the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Like, it's terrifying. It doesn't look terrifying because you got the like river boat, houseboat image with a rainbow and nice, green pasture hills. But can you imagine if you like picture in your head the flood's done, and for the next several years, you're constantly just walking up on mutilated bodies from people getting strewn about the earth. Like, that's disgusting. Yep. It's not, if you think about it hard enough, like, it's not for kids.
Yeah.
Like, it's tough.
I think that part of the reason why like it is presented for kids is in part due to the brevity of the story. Like, the whole thing is only this much text, you know what I mean? Like, it's real short.
It's pretty small. It's a couple chapters, I think.
If they dwelled on the details, like, it could get really dark really fast. Like, the text doesn't talk about how many bodies were left after the waters receded. That part is kind of left to your imagination. But if the text did want to dwell on that, like, the text would get like really dark really fast.
Yeah.
So I'm glad
there's a lot of things implied that they didn't say.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I've been really bad at looking at the comments, but I did see one that I think is interesting. Do you mind if I pull it up? It's from my Catholic friend, Um, so my friend pick and choose, and so and pick and choose. If I'm putting words in your mouth, please correct me. But he is Catholic. Uh, I think that he would tell you that he's somebody who's um, Catholic, but has questions. But anyway. He says, Andy and Kevin, lately I've been going down this rabbit hole about prehistoric humanity, and the perspective shift is incredible, but it also makes some teachings of my religion, Catholicism, sound more absurd. And I asked, what exactly do you mean? And he said salvation and access to God's being exclusive to this one super recent institution, as well as stuff about family dynamics and sexuality. I wanted to kind of give that one over to you, Andy, since he did address the question to both of us.
Yeah. So exclusivity is an interesting word. I don't think that the claim that Catholicism makes is that Catholics are exclusively saved. But I think that might be a little bit besides the point. Where I'd want to start is just where you started, like at the beginning of time, right? As you know, from what we understand it, like understanding prehistoric history, you're like, what do we do with all these individuals who were like not homo sapiens in the sense that you and I were, but they were still like human beings? And like, did they just go to hell? What was going on with that? They existed. It seems that Adam and Eve, they're pretty intelligent and they have language skills. And in the story of Adam and Eve, and what do we do with that when we know that the human race goes back all the way until people, they can't read, they can't write, they're animalistic. And I think I would watch a lot of inspiring philosophies content on the Genesis account. I would say that the Genesis account doesn't necessitate a material creationist, that evolution runs its course, but at some point, maybe not for God, but from our perspective, in a temporal place and time, right? God comes in and he orders the universe. And we know that there was already creation there from the Genesis account, right? The earth was without form and void. We know from Isaiah, this word or this phrase, without form and void, is used to describe just a wilderness. And so the earth was just doing its thing. It was a creation of God and it was already there. But God comes and he creates. It's this Hebrew word, bara. It's the same word that David uses when he said, create in me a clean heart, right? David wasn't asking for a new heart to be made from the dust of the ground and his old heart ripped out, and, like it's a carburetor on a car that just went out. That's not what David is asking. David is asking God to order his heart in a certain way. And so I would say that a lot of what's happening in Genesis isn't material creation, but rather it's a purposing, it's an ordering of the creation God has made up to that point. And Adam and Eve seem to be the federal head, the first of that ordering. I know that a lot of Christians aren't going to maybe express those things because it's not something a lot of Christians know about or think about too deeply. But that's where I would fall on it. But I also don't think that Israel or the church have always been the exclusive people to have salvation. I think God saves people outside of this. For instance, you find Israel leaving Egypt and they're going on this campaign and they're winning victory. And you find this prophet, his name I think is Balaam, right? And he's a prophet of the Lord. And he has no idea who Israel is. He's got no idea, right? And Israel comes to the gates of, I'm forgetting, is it Moab? I want to say it's Moab. You guys are going to have to fact check me on this. I'm getting the basic swath of the story correct, but it's been a while. And the king of Moab asks Balaam, hey, can you prophesy against these people that we can have victory over them? And he goes to the Lord and he's like, and God's like, nope, you can't touch them or my people. And he's like, darn it. And there's a lot more that happens in that story, but it's important evidence that God wasn't just like, oh, here's this 30,000 slaves in Israel and all my other creation, I'm just going to completely put them out of my mind and forget about them. And I'm not going to send them prophets. I'm not going to communicate with them. They're all going to hell. They could be damned for all I care. And I'm just going to work with these like 30,000 people. And I'm going to pretend like I just love everybody. That doesn't really seem, if you're paying attention to the story in the Pentateuch, that doesn't seem to be what is really going on. There's a lot of brutality, of course, in the Pentateuch, but to say that like God focuses, there's this whole, race of humanity that just seems to be like damned for whatever reason. And then in the Bible, you find like a few people that God focuses on, and then he just kind of lets everybody go to hell on their own. It doesn't really just kind of turns a blind eye to them. Um, I think you're limiting yourself to what the Bible says. I don't mean that you should affirm that what the Bible says is not true, but what I'm saying is the Bible says what it says. It's not saying what it says is the only truth about those times in history. It's just zooming in on Israel. I hope that makes sense a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you. You know what I just did for the first time in a long time is look at the clock and realize that I've kept you for like an hour and 45 minutes, and we didn't talk about the rosary yet.
Let's talk about it real quick.
Okay, cool. I don't want to keep you longer than you have. I know you actually have like, kids and stuff.
Let's do like a 20-minute. Let's do a 20-minute. You ask me a few questions about the rosary that you find important, and then ask me 4 or 5 questions about the rosary. I'll respond, and we'll call it quits then. How about that?
I would love that, but I would also love to ask you like 2 questions and then give you time to pepper me with questions too. I mean, I'm also more than happy to come onto your show, and then if you wanted to hit me with 2 hours of questions like I just did to you, that's totally cool too.
Let's do that instead. Don't ask me to ask you questions now. I didn't come prepared for that.
Okay.
But how about you come on my show here in a few weeks, and the roles will be reversed. But I love answering questions. I don't feel like you disrespected me by doing this at all. I love being here.
Good.
I live for this, man.
Cool. Okay. So, for me, I grew up with the story of Saint Dominic. So you even alluded to something earlier today. I think you said something like, so the sources are later. It's like a later legend. Who cares? For me, growing up, it was very much so like, no, this definitely happened. And in the video that I did about Our Lady of the Rosary, I shared a clip of, a certain Father Monahan, or so, I forget what his name is. But he does this whole big thing about how Satan sent the bubonic plague to Europe to destroy the documentary evidence of Saint Dominic receiving the rosary. And so that's why Our Lady had to appear to Blessed Alan de la Roche or whatever, 300 years later, because all the evidence was destroyed by the bubonic plague. And so that's why there's this weird awkward 300-year gap between and I just
love how Satan sends the bubonic plague to attack the rosary, but not just he hasn't worried about attacking the church with the bubonic plague this whole time.
No, just
the rosary across the line.
Yeah. Right. So I look at all that and I'm like, no, I think it's a lot more honest just to say it's a later legend.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is, I guess a good question to ask is do you care whether or not the story is historically true? And then if you don't care whether it's not historically true, does the historical truth should that hinder somebody's devotion to the rosary, or do you think it doesn't matter, the rosary is a tool, who cares how it came to us? That was a lot of questions. Let me kind of let you wrestle.
No, that's okay. So first of all, in a way, I do care about the truth of the legend, because if it is true, then it's a lot more meaningful, or at least the legend is. I'm not saying the rosary is more meaningful if the legend is true. If the legend is true, then it's a lot more meaningful. But look, my wife could rush in and be completely lying and say, Mary just appeared to me. And if that were true, it would be a lot more meaningful. So I'm kind of invested in these things, whether they're true or not. Now, do I think that there is evidence to suggest that Mary did appear to Dominic? No, not necessarily. It is exactly what I think it is. It's a pious tradition. And I think, as you said, I think it was Alan de la Roche, or Alan LaRoche or Alan de Roche, who kind of came up with this idea, or at least we hear it first from him, that Mary appears to Dominic to give him the rosary. Now, I can't say I'm invested. People think that maybe Alan is the real person who created the rosary. Some people think it wasn't Dominic, but it comes from Dominic's time. I would say I don't really care. Dominic is not really responsible, or Dominic is not really the source for where we see the majority of the rosary happening. We have a Dominic of Prussia, 100+ years later, who adds the sorrowful, the joyful, and it's grateful?
Glorious?
I'm really outing myself. Glorious. I'm really outing myself as a bad Catholic. I only pray the sorrowful. he adds those, and then JP2 in 2002 adds the luminous mysteries. And
Oh,
so
those aren't
like
real. Those aren't real. We don't talk about the luminous
they're not.
mysteries.
They're fake. They're fake. We
Yeah,
don't talk
they're
about
not real.
those mysteries, right?
Yep.
So, but then also the rosary is already made up largely of scripture. I'm trying not to say it in Latin because that's what I've been doing lately. I got to think about what it is now in English. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. This is just scripture, right? And so it's not like Dominic is really responsible for the majority of what makes up the modern day rosary. So am I really like invested? Like it has to be from Dominic or I'm not praying it? Well, if that's the case for me and if that's the case for you as a Catholic, then you should just like give up praying the rosary at this point because it's been added to and we have no idea what it looked like in the day of Dominic if Dominic did give it. And so do I think that the rosary comes from Dominic? Yes, I do. In the form that we have it today or close to the form we have today, that's really debatable.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree. There was this thing called Our Lady's Psalter that was prayed on beads. Now it didn't take the form, and I forget how different it was. It might have just been 150 Hail Marys in a row or something, and that's it. That might have been Our Lady's Psalter.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Our Lady of Salt. It was 150 Hail Marys, and people think that comes from certain monks would pray all 150 Psalms like every day or something like that. And I know that this is a later discipline enforced, but it would happen sometimes in the 13th century, in the early 13th century. And because people were illiterate and they can't just read all the Psalms as a prayer because they can't read, they're taught, Ave Maria, gratia plena,
Dominus
so and
tecum
so.
benedicta et vulieribus.
There you go.
I'm trying to remember because it's been a long time. I was gonna say, let me. Hold on. Can I try it? Buddy. Can I try it? Because I haven't said the rosary.
Go for it.
Okay. It's been like 7 years or whatever since I've said the Hail Mary in
Latin. You've got this.
Ave Maria.
You had a strong start.
Ave Maria, Dominus tecum benedicta tu et mulieribus. Wait, no, hold on. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum benedicta tu et mulieribus.
Okay.
I don't know.
You ready? Here it goes.
Yeah, let me hear it.
It's Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
There it is.
That is the
well done.
There you go. So they would get the Hail Mary. And this is just the theory, guys, is they wanted to be like the monks who prayed the Psalms 150. And so they had this rope with 150 knots in it, and they would pray it. And like he said, it was called like the Psalter of Our Lady or Our Lady of Psalter or something like that. And so that's one thought about one theory about where the rosary comes from. I think that's less likely. I'm not saying there was never Kevin is currently not trad Catholic.
Kevin has failed. Demoted.
He's currently a bad Catholic.
He is.
But Alan de Roche is not like this sole figure who attributes the rosary to Dominic. We have Alexander the Sixth in the 15th century. We have Innocent the Eighth, and there's one other pope. There's also a couple of historians, one of them being is a French historian, Jean de Mali, all right, who attributes the rosary to Dominic and even says immediately after the time of Dominic, the rosary lost favor, and then it was refound later. I think that those are all strong evidences to suggest that in the 15th century, there was a strong tradition the church shared that Dominic had. The rosary was sourced in Dominic. I also understand that there's not a lot of evidence for the extant text. I don't think Satan was responsible for destroying the text, but I understand that our history is comprised of extant texts, not texts that have been decayed over time and also not found and not discovered. So there could have been textual evidence for this that was either destroyed in a fire or rotted or just, people are illiterate most of the time. But I think the greatest evidence maybe for this has to be in conjunction with everything I just said. And it's that Saint Dominic was very concerned and he was tasked with dealing with the Cathars, who they were extreme Gnostics. They were dualists. They affirmed that the devil is the god of all things material. God, Jesus Christ, he's the God of all things spiritual. And so they would say, don't get married, don't have children, don't be baptized until right before you die, because these are all like physical acts. And God, the good God, is the God of spirit, and we're only supposed to be spirit. Don't even have kids because kids are material. And so that was avoided. And so there was a big challenge in this growing movement of the Cathars, or Cathars, or Cathari, or however you want to say it, to deny the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Now, you might not catch it if you're not Catholic in Latin, but it's Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus, right? A lot of you Protestants, you're so focused on being like, devotion to Mary instead of Christ, devotion to Mary instead of Christ. You forget that the rosary, especially the angelic salutation, that first half, is a constant affirmation of the incarnation of Christ, that Jesus Christ was in the womb of Mary and he was God. Mary is the mother of God. And so it makes sense to me that there seems to be a tradition and momentum that even popes and historians are claiming that it comes from Dominic in the 15th century. Dominic is allegedly responsible for dealing with these people who deny the incarnation of Christ, and big whoop, he's also seems to be responsible for this prayer where the incarnation of Christ is constantly affirmed over and over and over again. Is that coincidental evidence? Yeah, but I think it's really strong, and the puzzle pieces fit, and I think it makes it more likely, in my opinion.
Can I kind of throw my theory past you and see what you think of my theory?
Yeah.
My theory is that the historical Saint Dominic probably was like legitimately a proponent of like Our Lady Salter, and over the course of 200 plus years, Our Lady Salter organically developed into the Rosary, and then Blessed Alan wound up kind of tying the dots. He connected the dots a little bit. Maybe the dots weren't really like maybe this but I think that Blessed Alan was being like a little anachronistic, like Our Lady was giving Dominic a prayer that didn't really exist yet, but like the grandfather of that prayer did exist. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think that all that Blessed Alan was doing was kind of connecting the dots. So the story is anachronistic.
A little bit, yeah. But I think it's ignorantly anachronistic, because there's a sense you can say Jesus Christ started the church, right? But the church didn't look back then like it looks now. But that doesn't mean it's not true. Jesus Christ starts the church. And so, but that could be kind of confusing to some Catholics, because some Catholics who are more ignorant suddenly think that like the papacy existed in the first century as it existed today. I'm fine with how it exists today. I think it exists this way out of necessity, and the development of doctrine is a good thing. But to think that it was just like, Paul was slipping on vestments and going into a giant, auditorium, and he was going into the sanctuary, and he had a silver plated censer, and he had like 6 kids around him that were like with the censer.
I was a thorough.
That's what people hear. Yeah, there you go.
I was one. Server. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I found the source, by the way. I just looked it up real quick, so just from memory. It's John D'Malley in his book Chronicles of the Diocese of Metz, written in 1243 AD. He claims that it was a wide practice, especially among women, to recite in that day the angelic salutation 150 times.
There you go.
So that could be evidence that what the rosary started as was the angelic salutation for the illiterate, or it was the 150 prayer bead for the illiterate. Couldn't read the Psalms. Instead, we have this constant affirmation. And remember that the angelic salutation is just the first part. It's not the Holy Mary, Mother of God. It's not that part. It's the Hail Mary, Mother, full of grace, Lord is with thee, blessed art so-and-so. That's the angelic salutation. They pray that 150 times. So it makes sense to me that Dominic, who is first and foremost a preacher who is tasked with dealing with these people who doubt the incarnation of Christ, would start this prayer for the people he's trying to reach and prevent from converting to this Gnostic faith, with this opportunity to pray like the monks. But instead of the Psalms, it's an affirmation of Christ's incarnation. Yeah. That story makes sense to me. I don't have evidence that Mary gave it to him. Is it a pious tradition? Yes. Could it have happened? I choose to live my life as if it did, but academically speaking, I have to recognize that there's no evidence to suggest that from Dominic's time. And so in me, even though I affirm it, it lives just as a pious tradition. So I understand that it may not be true, but I think it benefits me spiritually to live as if it is.
Hey, and I'm not going to have anything to disagree with there. That I think that's like a totally reasonable way to go about thinking about the rosary. That's not the way that I grew up, you know. But I think that's like a really good. If I was a Catholic today, I would probably have
Look,
I would say the exact.
Did
same
I
thing,
convert
probably.
you? Are you going to be Catholic now?
Hey,
I could be the Catholic dad you never had.
That's true. Sometimes when people are like, "Can I like convert you?" I make the annoying point of like, "Well, I am still Catholic. Maybe I'm a really bad
Technically,
Catholic, but I could just go to
you're a
confession
subject
tomorrow
of the
and then
church.
I am. Yeah, see,
You just be
I'm
right back in
baptized.
this
I've
world.
never been excommunicated. I'm not Catholic. I know what people mean. I'm not practicing, and that's what they mean.
Yes.
But sometimes I like to be
Yeah.
annoying. I'm like, well, technically,
What are you talking about? I am Catholic.
yeah, a bad one, but hey, a Catholic nonetheless. And
There you
again,
go.
I only say that to be annoying. I know what people mean. But yeah, I like to be annoying.
Well, this is
every
why
now
we
and
have
then.
sayings like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush,
Yep.
right?
Exactly.
Kevin, are you a bird? Are you two birds in a bush? Are you two birds in a bush?
Well,
You
I
might
would be if birds
be
were
two birds.
real, but as we remember, birds are not real.
That's true.
Yeah.
You know what? Two fish in a bush. Let's just say that. Two fish in a bush. The fish might be real. We're not sure about them yet.
We're not sure. We'll figure it out. Tune in next time for our discussion about whether fish are real. Andy, I've kept you for 2 hours now. I think that this is a pretty good spot to end it, but I would like to hand the mic back to you one last time in case if there was like a topic that we didn't get to that you just want to mention briefly or something. Feel free. The floor is yours. And my final question to you is, if my audience wanted to hear more from you, where can they find you?
They can find me at Persuaded Apologetics. It's my YouTube channel. I'm on TikTok and I'm on YouTube. I put more effort into my YouTube, but the posts are further apart on YouTube because I put a lot of work into my videos. Sometimes I animate them poorly, but it still takes me a long time. What you can expect from my content, and my hope, is that you find traditional Catholicism, true traditional Catholicism, not trad Catholicism, where you have a stagnant faith and you get mad about Vatican II and you see a priest turn his altar around and you have a heart attack and a seizure. That's not what I'm talking about. I want to affirm the Christian position. And so if you are sick, if you are you're not a practicing Catholic and you are sick of seeing these Crusader edit ortho bro dweebs online talk about how we need to launch another crusade against the femboys. If you're sick of that stuff, just come over to my channel because I'm traditional, but I'm not ridiculous. And I'm completely in communion with the church. I think Francis was the Pope. I don't watch Taylor Marshall. And so, Persuaded Apologetics. Come give me a follow there. I think I'm a pretty fun guy. I could be intense sometimes, but I think I'm a pretty fun guy.
Awesome. Andy, thank you so much. I can't wait to do this again on your channel sometime soon when it's my turn to be in the hot seat. But until then, thanks for coming on the show, everybody. Thanks for hanging out in the live chat. Sorry I didn't really read it too much today. But with that, until next time.